All right, everybody, welcome into episode 1 of CyHawk Talk. You're going to get familiar with us. My name's Ben Hutchens. On the other side of the frame is Ethan Petrik. We're covering Iowa State and Iowa sports. Right now, talking a lot of football. We'll get into everything on CyHawk Talk. But it's the new show. We both write for the Quad City Times, Waterloo Falls Courier, all sorts of papers throughout the Lee Enterprises network across Iowa and into Illinois. We'll get into all of that, but right now, Ethan, we got a couple big football storylines to talk about. I'm excited to get to it. First time introduction. I cover the Big 12. I'm familiar with it. It's my second week here covering Iowa State sports, and I'm excited to get to it. Ethan, tell the folks a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'd like to think I'm a little bit more well known in Iowa, coming from the Waterloo-Cedar Falls career and covering UNI for the last couple of years. But that's my background. Happy to be with the Quad City Times covering the Hawkeyes, even though I went to school at Nebraska.
Okay,
You mentioned some of the big football storylines coming into the week. What can you tell us about the Iowa State Houston game? I'm kind of keen to hear your takeaways on that one. I watched a little bit of the Iowa State Arkansas State game last week. Uh, where's the team at? The Cyclones at right now?
I'd be really impressed if you watched past the third quarter, Ethan. But I'm guessing you probably watched when that game was a little bit closer because it certainly was a mismatch, and the Cyclones really ran away with that one. So I guess I'm looking forward to this Houston matchup to kind of get a better gauge on actually where the Cyclones are at, specifically with the run game. It had been lacking in the Iowa State's first two games. You saw it. The Cyclones got shut down in CyHawk, less than 100 yards on the ground in that game, less than 100 yards on the ground against North Dakota in the opener. And then all of a sudden last week, they pop off for 234 yards on the ground as a team. Now, the caveat there is it came against the Arkansas State Red Wolves, who were only better than three other teams in the FBS against the run. So I'm curious to see if this run game reemergence we saw last week was a mirage. I'm curious to see that. That's what I'm looking forward most to against the Houston Cougars.
Yeah, I think when most people think about the run game in Ames, they think about Abu Sama and his big game against Kansas State last year in Farmageddon. So that's kind of like the lasting image I have when it comes to the Cyclones ground game. I'm curious. I figured it would be a little bit more fine tuned at this point. I know they got the new OC in this year, but I'm kind of surprised by the struggles that I've seen out of Iowa State, and you can't really blame them for any struggles in the CyHawk game. Iowa's allowing only 62 yards on the ground to all their opponents right now, and Minnesota has a couple of good backs that they trotted out and they struggled against Iowa. So I think that can kind of maybe hurt the data a little bit when you're talking about the Cyclones ground game. Where do you fall? You think what have you been hearing? Do you think we're going to get a better ground attack from the Cyclones this weekend?
I do think it'll be better. And you're absolutely right. You can never hold a team for what they do offensively against Iowa. That's the exception, not the rule. And I also think with the North Dakota game in the opener, that game, North Dakota dominated time of possession. Iowa State used big plays, Rocco Beck deep passes to score in that way. So there wasn't really a need to run the ball there. And that's why I'm looking forward to this running game and just seeing what it looks like against Houston. I do think it'll get going. And the Cyclones have been doing it a little bit differently. You mentioned Abu Sama in that Farmageddon game. And when I think back of Iowa State running backs and the way the Cyclones have had really effective running years, it's with guys like Brees Hall and David Montgomery, singular guys who strap up, put on the backpack, and carry that running attack. This year, it's different. Maybe it is with the new OC, but it's certainly more of a committee. You look at Carson Hansen, Abu Sama, and Jalen Jackson, who all averaged over 4 yards a carry last week. Hansen had 9 carries, Sama had 7, Jackson had 10 carries. And I think it is a little bit more of a running back by committee. If you're looking for differences in them, which is what a committee is, where you want guys doing a little bit of different things better than the other, Hansen's maybe a little bit more of your pass catcher. I think Jackson might be the best pure runner out of that group. And Sama, he's your power guy. He's your short distance physical runner. So they're doing it by committee, and it's working so far. It's just a matter of being able to stay healthy and continue to do it that way.
You mentioned the North Dakota game, and there was quite the discourse on X that Saturday about what was going on and how they couldn't, they were just barely beating this FCS opponent. And I kind of had a chuckle when I looked at the box score and saw the time of possession numbers because anyone who's followed the Valley for any stretch of time knows that that's North Dakota's game, no matter who they're playing, is to just play keep away and just kill the clock. And so I just, I wasn't surprised when I saw the stats on what North Dakota was doing. And then when you look at the CyHawk game, maybe the ground game is suppressed a little bit, not only by the Iowa defense, but the fact that Iowa State trailed for the majority of the second half and only pulled ahead with 6 seconds left in the game. That's certainly going to change the play calling a little bit. You have a one play drive that goes 75 yards for a touchdown as well. You're not going to get any rushing yards on that drive. So I don't know. I think that run game panic might be a little premature. Of these three backs, which of the three have impressed you the most so far?
Maybe it's a little recency bias, but I think about Hansen and in the way he ran the ball against Arkansas State. He's a guy who got kind of the bulk of the carries. Like I said, he had 9 of them. Looked probably, I'd say, the best, but everybody looked good. I think Hansen was the most impressive last week.
And then tell me about the history that was made in Jack Trice this last weekend or recently. I guess I haven't been keeping that close of an eye. Tell me a little bit about the history that's going on over there.
I don't blame you, Ethan, because it kind of feels inevitable, right? It's not a big secret that Matt Campbell is creeping up on Iowa State's all-time wins record. And I'm here to tell you, he tied Dan McCarney last week with 56 wins at Iowa State. And this week, 6 p.m. on Fox Sports 1 down there in Houston, he's expected to go out there and get his 57th victory, which would put him solely in the lead for all-time victories at Iowa State. And heck, if a podcast is due for anything, I guess we can throw a plug in there. I'm writing a big story this weekend. It'll drop on Friday about McCarney and the legacy that kind of he left to kind of pave the way for Campbell and what has made Campbell have the success he has. It'll be interesting, I think, to see what Campbell does when he gets that record, right? Every time it's been brought up, he's deflected and given praise to other people and kept his eye on next week. So I'm kind of excited to see if the Cyclones do take care of business in Houston, what Campbell, his reaction is to such a monumental record that clearly means a lot to him.
Yeah, Coach Campbell is a master of elite coach speak. I don't think that you can expect anything else from him going into any press conference. So it's always fun to see the inventive ways he figures out how to answer your questions with that unique vernacular. Uh, I have to suspect you might be predicting Iowa State victory this weekend. Or do I have to wait till the end of the show to figure out where you're going in that respect?
No, I'll give it to you right now. I do think Iowa State's going to win. They're a 13 and a half point favorite right now. I'll say they cover. I'll give them a 2 touchdown victory in Houston.
You're taking him to cover the spread.
That's right. That's
All
right.
right, he's bold. He's been there. You've seen him one time in person. Well, actually, you said you
Well,
saw
hey,
him last year.
when the only thing you've seen is them play Arkansas State, I guess maybe you can understand where I'm coming from. That was my first game physically. Yeah, I did get to watch the CyHawk and the North Dakota game on TV. But you're right. Everything I've seen, admittedly from a very small sample size, has me thinking the Iowa State is rolling right now.
Well, Arkansas State played Michigan fairly decently the week prior, so maybe it's not the worst litmus test you could possibly have for the Cyclones before they start Big 12 conference play. Go ahead and shift gears a little bit and move into the storylines I'm keeping an eye on over the course of the Iowa bye week. I think the number one storyline that everyone's paying attention to over in Iowa City is Kaleb Johnson and his rapid rise from low man on the depth chart to the number one unquestioned running back for the Hawkeyes, and he's actually the nation's leading rusher with 685 yards. He's got 9 touchdowns. It's already the best season of his career in terms of touchdowns. He's got a career high 9. His previous career high was his freshman year 6. He's done it in 4 games compared to 13 his freshman year. And I think the thing that makes this most stunning is last year it was a sophomore slump for Kaleb Johnson. He only had 463 yards, 3 touchdowns, 117 attempts. He's on pace to absolutely blow all of those stats out of the water. And it was great to finally get Coach Tim Lester at the podium this week to kind of ask him about how Kaleb Johnson went from this. I wouldn't say he was unknown. I think he was very well known. I think the talent was obvious, but nationally probably wasn't a guy that was on a lot of people's radar. Um, and the big thing that Coach Lester said is Kaleb Johnson really sat down during the offseason and dug into the film and figured out how to be a patient runner and how to find the holes in his offense. And it's an offense similar to what the Packers run, what the 49ers run. And we've seen running backs go crazy in those offenses as well. So I think that's kind of the recipe to success for Kaleb Johnson. But maybe not getting the national respect he deserves. I'll get into that later. Uh, Ben, have you been able to catch any of what Kaleb Johnson has done this year?
Of course, watching that CyHawk game, I wondered why Iowa didn't turn around and hand it to him, 35 times. It didn't feel like Iowa State could stop him. Do you think Caleb's gotten better just with the film breakdown, or is it a physical aspect, a physical maturing? What are kind of the things that have led to his breakout?
Well, like I said, Coach Lester said he really dug into the film, figured out how to be a patient runner. Said he started out camp kind of trying to pick and choose his holes, not necessarily waiting for the one that the offense was giving him. It's a work in progress. He's not a perfect runner yet, but he's certainly a lot closer than he was when Coach Lester arrived. And I also think that Kaleb told us 2 weeks ago that he's kind of started to focus on the details a lot more, and that's one of the reasons why he stayed at Iowa. He had a number of people a number of programs reach out to him, ask him to enter the transfer portal, ask him if he was interested in entering the transfer portal. And he wanted to stay at Iowa because he knew that this was the place he could learn the fine details. And so I think it's a kind of a combination of the offense they're running, his development by becoming a more patient runner, and then also, just focusing on those fine details that he mentioned that have allowed him to become, well, I wouldn't even say allow him to take full advantage of his God-given abilities because the talent has been evident since day one. And again, Coach Lester said the same thing. The first time I saw him run was when I knew he was a special talent. So I think it's kind of a combination of just getting everything right between the ears to take full advantage of that skill set.
Now, in my mind, if there's ever a time for a bye week for a college football team, it's a good time for one when you're heading into a matchup in the horseshoe against Ohio State. How do you think I was going to use this bye week, and what are some of the things they're looking at to stop these receivers like Emeka Buka and Jeremiah Smith, some of the most explosive, talented offensive players in the country?
Well, there's been a lot of discourse about their number 2 corner spot, their strong safety spot. You got Xavier Nwampa and Cohen Entringer going at it for that strong safety spot. Phil Parker got into it yesterday, and they want guys to be cross trained because God forbid an injury happens. They want someone ready and able to fill that spot without a huge drop off, right? So they're trying to get both these guys as many snaps as possible. He says they've both earned them. So when you look at the secondary, it's maybe had its issues. Um, but against Minnesota, they kind of started to shore those up. They gave up a ton of explosive plays against Troy to Devonta Ross. He just went crazy with he had receptions of 63, 62 for touchdowns and a 77-yard punt return. Phil Parker mentioned that it was a punt return, but said a lot of defensive guys play on the punt return. So he kind of took partial blame for that and kind of lumped that explosive play in on the defense. But then when you go and look at the Minnesota game, they really kept things in check. Minnesota's longest pass was 28 yards. They had 2 guys catch 28-yard passes, but that's not nearly as bad as what Troy was doing to the Hawkeyes the week prior. So I think they've really started to figure that out a little bit. Jay Higgins, All-American linebacker, told us 2 weeks ago that it was communication issues. And when you have a veteran defense, I think these guys probably know how to communicate with each other. They've been playing together for a while, and they have leaders established already. So it's not surprising that they've kind of managed to make this a quick fix in the secondary. As for slowing down Ohio State, I don't know if you necessarily slow down Ohio State. I think you just kind of hang on and do as much as you can to limit their ability to get those explosive plays.
Yeah, for sure. It's crazy. We've been talking, Iowa football, Iowa State football, for what, like 15 minutes now, and we have yet to bring up Iowa's quarterback. I don't know how many football teams you can get that deep into a conversation about and not talk about the quarterback. But what was your takeaway from Caden McNamara's performance in the Minnesota game, and what's kind of the perspective on him leading into this next part of the season?
Well, I think there were a lot of questions regarding Cade after his two interception game against Iowa State, and I think that a lot of people saw at least the first interception. Kind of hard to kill him for the one that happened on the Hail Mary. It's either going to be a touchdown or it's going to be an interception. It's kind of how Hail Marys work. But I think a lot of people saw that first interception and really blame him for maybe giving Iowa State momentum early in the second half. Uh, I've seen breakdowns of the play where they ran a play similar to what Texas had ran last season that worked really well against Iowa State, and Darian Porter's made a great play on the ball and probably shouldn't have been able to make it. He was just a unique enough athlete, a skilled enough athlete, a heady enough athlete to make that interception. So I think that maybe some of the slings and arrows Cade's been taking have been unwarranted. That being said, they have started to maybe dial back how much they're using him. He started out the season with 31 pass attempts in his 3 touchdown performance against Illinois State. That dropped to 29 against Iowa State, drops to 23 against Troy, drops to 19 against Minnesota. So he sees his season low usage against the Gophers, only throws for 62 yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, took 1 sack. So you're maybe thinking, is the strategy to limit how much you're passing the ball and just put the rock in Kaleb Johnson's hands? Seems like a winning strategy. But when we spoke to Tim Lester yesterday, he says that the Minnesota game was actually Cade's best game so far this season. And it's like, how is it his best game when he was used the least you've used him all year? Well, Lester said it was his footwork, it was his pre-snap stuff, checking into different plays, and then there were a couple instances where a receiver wasn't where they were supposed to be, and Cade had the ball right where he needed it to be, and then just some misfortunate things happened or unfortunate things happened as they were going through the course of the game that maybe affected Cade's effectiveness and limited his stats. So I, I tend to think that he's the right guy for the Hawkeyes right now. He's operating the offense in a way that he's not Patrick Mahomes out there, but he's also not costing them games. So I think that Cade's the right guy, and I think Hawkeye fans should have confidence with him going into a game.
If you were drawing it up, like what would you say Iowa State's coaches ideal kind of game situation looks like? Like how many throws ideally do those guys want Cade throwing in a game versus leaning on the run?
I think Coach Lester would tell you as many as necessary. He kind of likes to ride the hot hand. His quote is he's called 70 runs in a game. He's called 70 passes in a game. So whatever's working, he's going to hammer it. What I don't think there's necessarily a perfect game for Tim Lester. I think a perfect game is a game that he comes out on top. I think if you're a Hawkeye fan, you're probably looking at it and saying, well, I want Kaleb Johnson to have 30 runs and have 300 yards. And give the ball to Cade between 20 to 25 times to pass on pass attempts. I think that's probably where most people see a perfect Iowa game right now.
Tell me about the last note on our show for this portion of the
Yeah,
show.
that's actually
Hawkeyes
a
from downtown.
non-football. It's non-football. So this is a fun event. I was holding it for the second time, second year in a row, I should say. It's Hawkeyes from downtown. You're going to get members of the women's basketball, men's basketball, and women's wrestling programs. They're going to do a little event in downtown Iowa City, uh, and they're going to have like games and like exhibitions and skills competitions and whatever, and fans can come and hang out. There's going to be like Q&A, fan contests, all those sorts of things. Just a chance to interact with your favorite Hawkeyes on those sports teams. UNI has done something similar for the previous. I think they're going on to their third year now, called Main Street Madness. I was able to make it out there 2 years in a row, and it was pretty fun to watch. It's a very unique thing having basketball be played outside. You get really unique images from it. So I think it's going to be a fun time. It's a free event for the public. You only got to pay for the parking downtown. I just wanted to give an update on that and say, it's coming back. They released the press release today, so I wanted to make sure to get it in the show, and certainly something I'm going to find myself at on Friday, October 11th.
There you go.
We'll go ahead and round out the show with a little bit of looking forward. We're going to try and predict. We're newspaper men, so we're going to try and predict what the headlines are going to be on Sunday once all the dust is settled and 60 minutes have been played for the Cyclones and 0 minutes have been played for the Hawkeyes this week. Ben, why don't you go ahead and kick us off with Sunday's headlines today for Iowa State?
Yeah, Ethan, I can already see it in my head. I think you can blast across Campbell soaks in wins record with a big picture of him after a Gatorade bath. That was something that a couple of the players I mentioned, a couple of players we talked to this week mentioned was, hey, we want to do a Gatorade shower for Coach Campbell. And that's not to give that's not to put out there that are looking ahead or looking past or already thinking about the celebration. It's something they kind of mentioned offhand. I think Iowa State players are very focused on beating Houston and Coach Campbell, certainly in that same vein. But as I said, I think they're going to win, and I think that might be something that happens is Campbell soaking in this wins record, and also not just in a physical sense, right? I think he's going to maybe reflect back a little bit on his 9 seasons here, and take some time after he sets that record to talk about maybe what that means to him. That's my first headline for Sunday. We can fire them off. We can rotate. Do you just want me to run through them?
Yeah, go ahead and run through them.
Headline for Sunday: I think the 3-headed rushing monster scares Cougars away. It's hard to get scarier than a Cougar, but the 3 Iowa State running backs we talked about earlier could get pretty close. They were certainly effective last Saturday against Arkansas State, and I do think that Iowa State's running game gets going. I did a little bit of a film room breakdown this week where I looked at some of the bigger plays, and a lot of them came when Iowa State stacked 3 tight ends together. Steve O'Klotz, Tyler Moore, and Gabe Burkle all together weigh 780 pounds, and they are a force when they're blocking on the same edge. So I think the running game continues to roll. And my last headline, Ethan, is Cyclone Watch. Iowa State back in AP poll top 15 for first time since 2021. Purdy, Breece Hall. It's been a second since Iowa State has been in that top, 15. So, of course, they had that great season in 2020, and then 2021 they began high in the AP polls and were kind of on their way down. This time, Iowa State could be back up. After CyHawk, they got to number 20, knocked off Arkansas State, got to number 18. College football is crazy. I'm anticipating a couple more teams in front of them fall. So I think the Cyclones are back in the top 15.
I can't say I'm studying Iowa State's future schedule too terribly much, but what's stopping this Cyclone team from making the college football playoff?
The craziness of the Big 12 is the only thing I can think of. And Ethan, that's also the thing that would give a Cyclone fan confidence that they can make the college football playoff, because Baylor and Houston are coming up next. The Kansas Jayhawks, which is a road game in Kansas City, are after that. And maybe the Jayhawks aren't the team we thought they were at the start of the season. So the Big 12, it'll always get crazy. That's why it is the Big 12. But I do think that the Cyclones have as good of a shot as anybody to get on a roll and get deep into this season, where maybe the Utah game as the last Big 12 game in Salt Lake City is kind of what makes or breaks a potential Big 12 championship game and college football playoff berth.
Yeah, I've been kind of thinking about that with the expanded 12-team playoff. We're going to see a lot more teams in the discussion later into the season, and Iowa State felt like a team that could contend in the Big 12 this year for me all off season. So I'm not surprised to see them kind of emerging in that discussion as we move throughout the season into week 5 now. So I can't say that I'm stunned by what's going on, but we'll see how the season plays out. I don't like getting too bold with my predictions. We'll go ahead and shift into my predictions now. For number 1 headline for Iowa on Sunday, it's going to be "He's the man." Kaleb Johnson starts to get a little bit more respect in the Heisman race. A lot of people are discrediting what he's done so far as the nation's leading rusher because Ashton Jeanty at Boise State is 99 yards behind him, and he's only played 3 games. Kaleb Johnson's played 3.5. It says 4 because he played in the Illinois State game. People who cheer for the Hawkeyes know that he missed the first half due to a suspension, so he only played 3.5. Got 11 carries in that game, went off for 119 yards. You can only imagine what he could have done if he'd gotten a full 4 quarters to work against the Redbirds. He'd probably be leading Ashton Jeanty by a lot more yards than just 99. So what I think is going to happen is I think Ashton Jeanty is going to go out there. He's probably going to play. He's a good running back. He's probably going to have a good game, but it's going to give a little bit more of a better comparison for Johnson with both of these running backs having 4 games. And I don't want to pretend like Boise State's playing a bunch of scrubs. They did play a top 10 Oregon team, but they also played Georgia Southern and Portland State. So not exactly juggernauts. Only one Power 5 team or Power 4 team in there. Iowa's played 2 Power 4 teams now in Minnesota and Iowa State. So maybe let's give Kaleb Johnson a little bit more credit because he has been doing this at a high level all season, and not necessarily just say, well, this guy's got 1 less game and he's 99 yards away. It's like, yeah, Kaleb Johnson's still done really well. And then my number 2 headline going into next week is going to be shoe or die. Iowa made they didn't try and hide the fact that they were gunning for the college football playoff this year. They've been in the Big Ten championship numerous times in the playoff era, and they felt like if it's 12 teams and we make the Big Ten championship, how could you not be included in that playoff? Well, those hopes took a real shot when they lost to the Cyclones in week 2. And you're looking at the schedule. Iowa State is a tough loss for them to take when it comes to that. And you kind of got to get a win against the Buckeyes in order to kind of keep those playoff hopes alive. You're going to be hurting if you lose. To round it out, I just lost it. Bust to boom. Can Iowa figure out its passing game? Not a lot of explosive plays coming from the passing game. So that's going to be something to watch when it comes to facing the number 5 passing defense in the country in the Buckeyes. It's actually, surprisingly enough, the 3rd best passing defense that the Hawkeyes have faced all year. That's something I didn't get into with the K discussion, but Illinois State and Minnesota are both top 5 pass defenses right now, and Ohio State's number 5. So I was seeing worse than the Buckeyes, and that's probably what's gone into a little bit of the dip in production for Cade McNamara. But you're really looking for more explosive plays from that passing game. How are they going to figure it out? I think that's a big question a lot of people are going to be asking going into next week.
Ethan, we appreciate the headlines. We appreciate everybody getting to the end of the episode. We appreciate everybody reading our actual headlines, not our predicted ones on all of our newspapers and websites. So thank you for joining us. We'll be back every week talking Iowa State and Iowa Hawkeyes. You can keep an eye on your team, and you can keep an eye on the team you hate. That's the special thing about this show. So thanks for joining us. For Ethan, Petrik, and Ben Hutchens, we'll see you next week.